When I identified as straight, it was hiding from myself. And then when I identified as bisexual, it was appeasing men. It was trying to find myself, but then trying to do it in a way that still appeased the male gaze because I was so scared about losing the currency of male approval. Didn't know what life would be like without it. And then when I moved on to lesbian, it was intense freedom. It was expressing something that had been there all along, waving at me, waiting for me to notice it, and finally I waved back. I didn't really have a perception of what love was or what it looked like to be in a couple, aside from seeing my mom and dad, and having that representation of mom and dad, and then having all the Disney movies be the prince and the princess, and having all my friends around me talk about having crushes on boys, or having adults say she's gonna break some boy's heart one day, or the language and the verbiage was just there. And so I don't know if I distanced myself from queerness as a child because I understood that's what it was. I think I distanced myself because I was trying to get away from anything that had me under scrutiny and made me into an outcast. I was made fun of because I was a neurodivergent nerd. And then on top of that, all the representation around me was heterosexual. I didn't know who I was, so I looked at these external things to try and guide me. It was like programming. It wasn't even a question. I was like, I guess I should like boys. I guess I should have this crush. I loved the Spice Girls, but I would put up posters of Hanson, or I would put up posters of the Backstreet Boys, or like pick a member of the Backstreet Boys to have a crush on. Not because I actually had a crush, but because people would ask. They'd be like, oh, which one do you like? And it's not like I'm gonna be like, oh, I really like Sporty Spice. No, I had to really like Brian, that's who I chose as my crush. But I look back on it now, and I didn't have a crush on Brian from the Backstreet Boys. I had a crush on Sporty Spice. I was very lucky with my parents. There was no bigotry. There was a lot of acceptance. My mom grew up with religious trauma, and I think that's a part of the reason why we didn't grow up indoctrined into a religion. She wanted us to be able to just be ourselves. And so you'd think I'd have this space to sort of discover myself, but there was a lot of societal pressure. There's all these conservatives that are upset about certain books or people inviting in inclusive language, when in reality, just having inclusive language and just having those books doesn't mean people are going to feel safe to be who they are, because the world is still so hostile. And it was when I started to sort of think maybe the feelings I have towards girls are not just girl crushes. I went to my school counselor to talk about it. He asked me if I had any crushes on any boys. And at the time, I thought that I did, so I said yes. And then he asked, do you have any crushes on any girls? And at the time, I didn't. And so I said no. And he said, well, follow your heart. If you have crushes on boys and no crushes on any girls, then you're probably not a lesbian. And I left that going, okay, I guess I'm not. And then just continued with liking boys the way I had learned to like boys. When I left high school and got more into the dating world, I never chose my relationships. They just kind of happened to me. I would meet somebody and then they would like me. And I would think, oh, well, they like me. Yeah, I'll go on a date with them. And then I would just like go through those motions of dating them. And when it came to sex, my mom was very pro female pleasure. Her talk with me was like, Jamison, don't buy the first car you drive off of the lot. Drive a few, test drive, because maybe you'll like a convertible, maybe you'll like a truck, maybe you'll like a minivan. I'd be like, Mom! I treated sex kind of similarly, where I was like, okay, I need to figure out how this works for me. But it didn't come naturally. It was a process. I needed to learn how to have sex with men. It wasn't like I want this. It was like I'll figure this out. That cycle just continued until I became friends with somebody And her and I became really close, and I fell in love with her and recognized it as love. And it was a feeling I'd never felt before with any of my male partners. My mom knew I was in love with my friend before I even did. She would ask me all the time, "Are you sure you and her aren't dating? Are you sure?" I'm like, "No, Mom, we're just friends." She's like, "Because I really like her. She can be my daughter-in-law." And I'd be like, "No, Mom, we're just friends." And I think that's also another example of like having a supportive space, but still struggling to find yourself because society is so structured around heteronormativity. My roommate said, "Jamison, you're probably bisexual." And I was like, "What's that?" I date men. I was dating men. And it was the first time I'd ever heard the word bisexual. She was like, "It's where you like multiple genders." And I started to entertain the idea of bisexuality at that point. And it was like exhaling after holding your breath for so long to be like, "Oh my God, these feelings are real. I'm not making them up. I'm not insane. I don't have to explain them away. I like girls too." And I didn't tell anyone that I thought I was bisexual. Didn't come out, just like quietly held it inside. Even just self-acknowledging was huge, and continued to date men. And again, continued just to fall into these relationships. I would never pursue them. I got to a point where I wanted to explore my bisexuality. And so I got on the apps and listed my sexuality as bisexual. I put in there that I wasn't looking for anything serious. Didn't want a relationship. I ended up matching with this guy, and we went and had a drink together. And I asked him what he thought about me being bisexual, and he was like, "Oh, it's great. I totally support it." And I hadn't really been out to anyone. And so having him be like, "I dig it," I was like, "Oh, great. I'll keep seeing this guy. Like, he's great." And he was great in the beginning. I didn't realize that I was falling into an abusive relationship. You never know. You never know up front when it's happening. It's not like a big wave hitting you. It's like erosion. It's like slowly eroding you down. I also didn't realize that he only was okay with me expressing my feelings towards women because he thought it was hot. And as we continued to date, he started to take digs at my self-esteem more and more. I started to be me less and less. I did the things that made me happy less and less. I was just constantly tiptoeing around, constantly explaining to myself why I was with this person because I'd chosen him. I woke up in the middle of the night with chills and sweats and this intense pain in my lower back. And I turned and I looked at him and I thought, I can't wake him up. It will annoy him. Got myself to the clinic, got diagnosed, got my antibiotics. I got a UTI and then I got a kidney infection, and then got back home and told him about the kidney infection, told him how excruciating the pain was, only to have him choose every day after work to go to the pub instead of coming home and helping me because he found me gross and boring. And he was like, "Well, why don't we open up our relationship? But you can only date women. You can't date men. But I can date women." My sexuality was all about what pleased him. And so we did open up our relationship. We met this woman, and she hadn't been with a man before, so she was open to joining our relationship. And we had a few experiences together because she wanted to see what all the fuss was about, sleeping with men. And she soon realized the fuss was about nothing and did not want to sleep with him anymore, and asked if we could just keep seeing each other. And he didn't perceive her as a threat. He didn't think that that relationship with her would matter. He just thought it was hot. So he was okay with it. And her and I fell in love while we were together. We had this date planned that I had to cancel because I ended up getting a cold, just a bad cold. And she went to the supermarket and went and got all my favorite hippie organic stuff. Got me a blanket. She got this box. We both loved Gilmore Girls, so she filled the box with quotes from Gilmore Girls and printed out all these little cutouts from the show and put them all over the box, and then dropped it off on my front step. And it was just this that I didn't know how to accept it. Again, because when you're in this situation where you're getting treated poorly, You make excuses to try and excuse away why you don't deserve good treatment or why, this is just how it is. And so when someone shows up for you and they're like, here, I'm taking care of you, there's almost like this resistance where you're like, I can't accept this, because if I accept this, then I have to realize that this was abuse. And so she dropped it off. I opened it up, and the entire time I just felt like anxious and undeserving, and I didn't know how to reply. I sent her like this, oh my God, this is so amazing. Thank you so much. And then I just didn't want to process it because it was so thoughtful. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. She's still one of the great loves of my life. Whoa, I don't think I've cried about this before, or at least not in a long time. And it got to a point where I had to end the relationship with her because the love I felt for her was so strong. And I'd already, at this point, my partner and I were engaged. Him and I were engaged. And I couldn't imagine hurting him like that. I'd made this commitment. And so the only answer logically to me was to end my relationship with her. I knew that that love would be so strong that I couldn't be away from her. So we ended it so I could stay loyal to my fiance. And then he and I closed our relationship. I was so under his thumb and at the mercy of his approval that I didn't know how to get myself out of that relationship. But the love that I had with her was a part of what helped me get myself out, because having someone treat me well helped me recognize that I wasn't being treated anywhere close to well with him. There was a point in our relationship where he came home really drunk and he wanted to have sex, and I didn't because he was very drunk. And so I put him in the guest room and I went back to bed. And then I just woke up with him on top of me. And I just waited for it to be over. In the morning, I told him what happened. All he said to me was, oh, that's not very good. And then he went and took a shower, and that was it. I went back to him and said, look, we can't get married. We can't have this relationship. We're not in a good place. You've raped me. You hurt me all the time. You wear down my self-esteem. You don't even seem like you like me. And he told me, if we call off this wedding, my entire family's gonna come down on me and I'm not gonna be in a good place to work on us and our relationship. I told the people I was closest with that it wasn't going to be a legal wedding. The entire day was like an ebb and flow of feeling love from my friends and family and then feeling intense depression and this feeling of being trapped. I never thought I'd be the person who would get into an abusive relationship. I thought that I was above it, which is so naive, because I had these good examples in my life, because I was encouraged to be a strong, independent woman, because I had this strong friend group. I didn't think it would be me. And what made me such a good target came down to that me being a people pleaser comes from my mom. She based a lot of her personality and a lot of her sense of self around how she served other people, which even when she got out of her first marriage and became more independent, she still sort of stuck on to that misogynistic, patriarchal attitude of a woman's worth is in how she is serving other people. She took care of other people more than she took care of herself. I found out that my ex had a difficult childhood. And so I explained that away, being like, oh, he acts this way because of the difficulty he had in his childhood. I wanted to fix him, which, young, dumb me, thinking that if I just, grin and bear it, if I stick it out, if I love him enough, it'll all be okay. And that's not true. And then on top of that, trying to convince myself of my attraction to men, convincing myself that I like men continually. I'm not going to demonize my coping mechanisms because they helped me survive. They were so important to me surviving that relationship. But I do acknowledge that they're a part of the cycle. They're a part of what keeps you there longer. because if I reacted to every single piece of abuse, it would get to a boiling point much faster. And in me not reacting, in me figuring out how to cope with it and numbing it out so I can survive, I stayed longer. Staying with him, even though I had this example of what healthy love could be, came down to me not ready to let go of my survival tools. I needed a lot of therapy to get to that place. I wish that I had more space to figure this out sooner than like now at 36, finally like feeling secure in my identity and finally feeling like my queerness belongs to me and that it doesn't belong to the attraction of a cis heteronormative world. I don't know if I'd go back and do, well, there's certain things I'd go back and change. I probably would have never gotten engaged to my ex-fiance. If I could go back in time, I would maybe change that. I would get to the point of the relationship where I met my ex-girlfriend, and then I would peace and I would be out of there. But other than that, I don't know if I would go back and change it, because where I'm at now, I'm so happy. And that happiness is really precious, and I wouldn't want to risk it by wishing that I had made other choices when I was younger. I made the choices at that time that I could with the information that I had. But I am really excited for generations to come and the space that they'll have, because there's more representation.